Hello, my name is Joaquin Crespo, and today we are going to talk about historical narratives. Over the last few weeks, we have covered many subjects, from the reasons and the ways that they led to the supremacy of the West, to how that the West perceives others, and how the rest perceives the West. We've gone to analyze and question concepts such as civilization and progress, and came to the realization that we live in a world that is determined by a Western paradigm. Now that we start to see many different perspectives on how to deal, cope, and improve under these Western-led social structures, according to Vandana Shiva, we must resist. For Cheryl Wadun, we can improve working within the system. For Hans Rosling, there is data and hope and lessons to be learned. In Gapminder, we find historical data. This data in itself has no meaning. We give its form and meaning, and that is crossed by our own ideologies. An ideology is a set of conscious and/or unconscious ideas which constitute one's goals, expectations, and actions. An ideology is a comprehensive normative vision, a way of looking at things. This includes history and how we interpret history. We can decide to see history as a circle that repeats itself, as a flat line. There are many possibilities, but the way we decide to look at it, it shapes how we perceive the world. For me, history is not a straight line that goes from point A to point B from left to right. It is more similar to Scrabble, where one story connects to other, and from there many more are connected and born. The stories that become history are the ones that get more points. These points are earned in many ways, being the victor in a war, harnessing technological advancements, having scientific and cultural institutions. We have seen this from the very beginning of the course, on how the West came to power. But now we are going to see four different examples of how we can find narrative, how our ideologies can give meaning to those narratives that we find in the data proposed by Rosling in Gapminder. First, we have here the standard income per person in one axis, population in human agglomerations. This means how many people in a country live in a city. Here we have Lebanon and the United Arab Emirates. It is very interesting this case because here we have Lebanon, that it begins with a urban population similar to the US, but then it comes the 80s and the 90s, and wars start to occur in Lebanon's territory, and we see very clearly how the population in urban areas start to decline very rapidly, and it's just now that this population is recovering. Let me play it again. Then we have the United Arab Emirates. It is very curious because the general trend is that all countries increase their urban populations, but we have the United Arab Emirates that they start very high in the 1960s, and they start a steady decline in urban populations. It is very curious. Now, the narrative from Lebanon is very clear. War with Israel, Hezbollah, and everything contributes to this decline in urban populations. But with the United Arab Emirates, is not that clear, because you have no major conflicts in there. You have a very rich country with oil. So, what happened? there is one possible narrative. You can explain several different ways, and everyone will be as valid. It depends on how you see the world. Now we have a very interesting case. We have Ecuador and Botswana. It was a very one of the model African countries, if you will, because it had no wars. It was a steady democracy, and we can see that in comparison with Ecuador, it was doing very well. How do you explain that in 1993, more or less, Ecuador and Botswana had the same income per capita, but Ecuador's life expectancy was rising steadily, and suddenly a country with the same economic conditions, maybe that Ecuador, has a very sharp decline. This is because of the AIDS epidemic. But what is very interesting is even with its epidemic, Botswana came to have more income per capita than our own country, even though we live longer. So it's very interesting. There is a lot of possible narratives. Now we have something very funny. This is Iceland playing basketball. We can see that Iceland just goes back and forth all over the place, all the 18th century, and then it starts to go ballistic, and it starts to go one way or another until finally it rises. It reaches the maximum, the life expectancy level. Here with Russia we have the most interesting case. Looking out to all this data, one is easy the temptation to see history as progress, because one can see that almost every country increases their income per person over the 200 years. But with Russia we can see literally history on the making just by looking at the data. Here is Russia going back and forth, but then we have the Russian Revolution, and the country goes back and goes back, almost 50 years in the past. For the revolution and the wars, people start dying, the economy goes to hell. So we have the Russian Revolution and the First World War. Then we have the forced industrialization imposed by Stalin in these years, and we can see that the population goes very far down. It is almost this fall is almost as bad as Second World War, where Russia obviously loses 20 million people, and the economy obviously goes back. But then we have the post-war years, where Russia has a growth at the pair of the West. Here is the Western countries is a little behind, but it's almost the same. Then we have 1999, the last year of the Soviet Union. As we will see, it is at its peak of life expectancy and income per person. It's at the pair with China in life expectancy, but is the highest that it achieves in income per person, life expectancy. Then with the fall of the Soviet Union we have shock therapy and imposed liberalization of the economy by Boris Yeltsin. Let's see what happens. Russia goes back, so maybe it's not a straight line, is not our progress, and then it starts to recuperate until today. So we have that Russia goes back and forth in time, if you will. So It's up to you to decide. From the Western standard narrative, Russia was backwards because they were communists. But if we see the data, they were growing at the same rate that everyone else. Obviously, there was no human rights in the Soviet Union, but the economic data is there. So it really depends on how you interpret the data to decide if the Soviet Union was good or was bad. Because if you can see, the last year of the Soviet Union was better than what Russia is doing now, even with democracy and all that things that we in the West like. So there it is. It is all about narratives. And what is interesting about this data is that it creates stories. And even though it's just data, it creates people, and we can see how they struggle over the years with wars, famine, and conflicts. And it is an invitation to see others complexly, not just to see them as monolithic masses of people. And we can see them as actual people. And also we can see this trend of growing, and we can get hope, the hope that Hans Rosling was trying to give us.